drifting north. It was a wet, bad year on the old western trail. From Red River north and all along was herd after herd waterbound by high water in the rivers. Our outfit lay over nearly a week on the South Canadian, but we were not alone, for there were 5 other herds waiting for the river to go down. This river had tumbled over her banks for several days, and the driftwood that was coming down would have made it dangerous swimming for cattle. We were expected to arrive in Dodge early in June, but when we reached the North Fork of the Canadian, we were 2 weeks behind time. Old George Carter, the owner of the herd, was growing very impatient about us, for he had had no word from us after we had crossed Red River at Doan's Crossing. Other cowmen lying around Dodge who had herds on the trail could hear nothing from their men, but in their experience and confidence in their outfits guessed the cause. It was water. We had left western Texas with a few over 3,200 head and were none shy. We could have counted out more, but on some of them the hat brand had possibly faded out. We went into a cozy camp early in the evening. Everything needful was at hand: wood, water, and grass. Cowmen in those days prided themselves on their outfits, and Carter was a trifle gone on his men. With the cattle on hand, drinking was out of the question. So the only way to show us any regard was to bring us a box of cigars. He must have brought those cigars from Texas, for they were wrapped in a copy of the Fort Worth Gazette. It was a month old and full of news. Every man in the outfit read and reread it. There were several train robberies reported in it, but that was common in those days. They had nominated for governor the little cavalryman, Saul Ross, and this paper estimated that his majority would be at least 200,000. We were all anxious to get home in time to vote for him. That night around camp, the smoke was curling upward from those cigars in clouds. When supper was over and the guards arranged for the night, storytelling was in order. This cattle buyer with us lived in Kansas City and gave us several good ones. He told us of an attempted robbery of a bank which had occurred a few days before in a western town. As a prelude to the tale, he gave us the history of the robbers. Cow Springs, Kansas, said he, earned the reputation honestly of being a hard cow town. When it became the terminus of one of the many eastern trails, it was at its worst. The death rate amongst its city marshals, always due to a six-shooter in the hands of some man who never hesitated to use it, made the office not over desirable. The office was vacated so frequently in this manner that at last no local man could be found who would have it. Then the city fathers sent to Texas for a man who had the reputation of being a killer. He kept his record a vivid green by shooting first and asking questions afterward. Well, the first few months he filled the office of marshal, he killed 3 men, making the town grow tame and listless. When the cattle season had ended and winter came on, there was no man to dare him to shoot, and he longed for other worlds to conquer. He had won his way into public confidence with his little gun, but this confidence reposed in him was misplaced, for he proved his own double both in morals and courage. To show you the limit of the confidence he enjoyed, the treasurer of the Cherokee Strip Cattle Association paid rent money to that tribe, at their capital $50,000 quarterly. The capital is not located on any railroad, so the funds were taken regularly in currency by the treasurer and turned over to the tribal authorities. This trip was always made with secrecy, and the marshal was taken along as a trusted guard. It was an extremely dangerous trip to make, as it was through a country infested with robbers and the capital at least 100 miles from the railroad. Strange no one ever attempted to rob the stage or private conveyance, though this sum was taken in regularly for several years. The average robber was careful of his person, and could not be induced to make a target of himself for any money consideration where there was danger of a gun in the hands of a man that would shoot rapidly and carelessly. Before the herds began to reach as far north, the marshal and his deputy gave some excuse and disappeared for a few days, which was quite common and caused no comment. One fine morning the good people of the town where the robbery was attempted were thrown into an uproar by shooting in their bank just at the opening hour. The robbers were none other than our trusted marshal, his deputy, and a cowpuncher who had been led into the deal. When they ordered the officials of the bank to stand in a row with hands up, they were nonplussed at their refusal to comply. The attacked party unearthed ugly-looking guns and opened fire on the holdups instead. This proved bad policy, for when the smoke cleared away the cashier, a very popular man was found dead while an assistant was dangerously wounded. The shooting, however, had aroused the town to the situation, and men were seen running to and fro with guns. This unexpected refusal and the consequent shooting spoiled the plans of the robbers, so that they abandoned the robbery and ran to their horses. After mounting, they parleyed with each other a moment and seemed bewildered as to which way they should ride, finally riding south toward what seemed a broken country. Very few minutes elapsed before every man who could find a horse was joining the posse that was forming to pursue them. Before they were out of sight, the posse had started after them. They were well mounted, and as determined a set of men as were ever called upon to meet a similar emergency. They had the decided advantage of the robbers, as their horses were fresh, and the men knew every foot of the country. The broken country to which the holdups headed was a delusion as far as safety was concerned. They were never for a moment out of sight of the pursuers, and this broken country ended in a deep coulee. When the posse saw them enter this, they knew that their capture was only a matter of time. Nature seemed against the robbers, for as they entered the coulee, their horses bogged down in a springy rivulet, and they were so hard pressed that they hastily dismounted and sought shelter in some shrubbery that grew about. The pursuing party, now swollen to quite a number, had spread out and by this time surrounded the men. They were seen to take shelter in a clump of wild plum brush, and the posse closed in on them. Seeing the numbers against them, they came out on demand and surrendered. Neither the posse nor themselves knew at this time that the shooting in the bank had killed the cashier. Less than an hour's time had elapsed between the shooting and the capture. When the posse reached town on their return, they learned of the death of the cashier, and the identity of the prisoners was soon established by citizens who knew the marshal and his deputy. The latter admitted their identity. That afternoon they were photographed, and later in the day were given a chance to write to any friends to whom they wished to say good-bye. The cowpuncher was the only one who availed himself of the opportunity. He wrote to his parents. He was the only one of the trio who had the nerve to write, and seemed the only one who realized the enormity of his crime and that he would never see the sun of another day. As darkness settled over the town, the mob assembled. There was no demonstration. The men were taken quietly out and hanged. At the final moment there was a remarkable variety of nerve shown. The marshal and deputy were limp, unable to stand on their feet. With piteous appeals and tears they pleaded for mercy, something they themselves had never shown their own victims. The boy who had that day written his parents his last letter met his fate with stoicism. He cursed the crouching figures of his pardoners for enticing him into this crime. We all took a friendly liking to the cattle buyer. He was an interesting talker. While he was a city man, he mixed with us with a certain freedom and abandon that was easy and natural. We all regretted it the next day when he and the old man left us. "Well, now that bank robbery that you were telling the boys about," said Baugh as he bit the tip from a fresh cigar, "reminds me of a hold-up that I was in up in the San Juan mining country in Colorado. We had driven into that mining camp a small bunch of beef and had sold them to fine advantage. The outfit had gone back, and I remained behind to collect for the cattle, expecting to take the stage and overtake the outfit down on the river. I had neglected to book my passage in advance, so when the stage was ready to start, I had to content myself with a seat on top. I don't remember the amount of money I had. It was the proceeds of something like 150 beeves in a small bag along of some old clothes. There wasn't a cent of it mine. Still, I was supposed to look after it. The driver answered to the name of Southpaw, drove 6 horses, and we had a jolly crowd on top. Near midnight we were swinging along, and as we rounded a turn in the road, we noticed a flickering light ahead, some distance, which looked like the embers of a campfire. As we came nearly opposite the light, the leaders shied at some object in the road in front of them. Southpaw uncurled his whip and was in the act of pouring the leather into them, when that light was uncovered, as big as the headlight of an engine. An empty 5-gallon oil can had been cut in half and used as a reflector, throwing full light into the road sufficient to cover the entire coach. Then came a round of orders which meant business. Shoot them leaders if they cross that obstruction. Kill anyone that gets off on the opposite side. Driver, move up a few feet farther. A few feet farther, please. That'll do. Thank you, sir. Now, every son of a horse thief, get out on this side of the coach, please, and be quick about it. The man giving these orders stood a few feet behind the lamp and out of sight, but the muzzle of a Winchester was plainly visible and seemed to cover every man on the stage. It is needless to say that we obeyed, got down in the full glare of the light, and lined up with our backs to the robber, hands in the air. There was a heavily veiled woman on the stage whom he begged to hold the light for him, assuring her that he never robbed a woman. This veiled person disappeared at the time and was supposed to have been a Confederate. When the light was held for him, he drew a black cap over each one of us, searching everybody for weapons. Then he proceeded to rob us, and at last went through the mail. It took him over an hour to do the job. He seemed in no hurry. It was not known what he got out of the mail, but the passengers yielded about 900 revenue to him, while there was 3 times that amount on top the coach in my grip, wrapped in a dirty flannel shirt. When he disappeared, we were the cheapest lot of men imaginable. It was amusing to hear the excuses, threats, and the like. But the fact remained the same, that a dozen of us had been robbed by a lone highwayman. I felt good over it, as the money in the grip had been overlooked. Well, we cleared out the obstruction in the road and got aboard the coach once more. About 4 o'clock in the morning we arrived at our destination, only 2 hours late. In the hotel office where the stage stopped was the very man who had robbed us. He had got in an hour ahead of us and was a very much interested listener to the incident as retold. There was an early train out of town that morning, and at a place where they stopped for breakfast he sat at the table with several drummers who were in the holdup. a most attentive listener. He was captured the same day. He had hired a horse out of a livery stable the day before to ride out to look at a ranch he thought of buying. The liveryman noticed that he limped slightly. He had collided with lead in Texas, as was learned afterward. The horse which had been hired to the ranch buyer of the day before was returned to the corral of the livery barn at an unknown hour during the night, and suspicion settled on the lame man. When he got off the train at Pueblo, he walked into the arms of officers. The limp had marked him clearly. In a grip which he carried were a number of sacks which he supposed contained gold dust, but held only talk on its way to assayers in Denver. These he had gotten out of the express the night before. Supposing they were valuable, we were all detained as witnesses. He was tried for robbing the mails and was the coolest man in the courtroom. He was a tall, awkward-looking fellow, light-complexioned, with a mild blue eye. His voice, when not disguised, would mark him amongst 1,000 men. It was peculiarly mild and soft, and would lure a babe from its mother's arms. At the trial he never tried to hide his past, and you couldn't help liking the fellow for his frank answers. "Were you ever charged with any crime before?" asked the prosecution. "If so, when and where?" "Yes," said the prisoner, "in Texas for robbing the mails in '77. "What was the result?" continued the prosecution. "They sent me over the road for 99 years. "Then how does it come that you are at liberty?" quizzed the attorney. "Well, you see, the President of the United States at that time was a warm personal friend of mine, though we had drifted apart somewhat. When he learned that the Federal authorities had interfered with my liberties, he pardoned me out instantly." "What did you do then?" asked the attorney. "Well, I went back to Texas and was attending to my own business when I got into a little trouble and had to kill a man. Lawyers down there won't do anything for you without you have money, and as I didn't have any for them, I came up to this country to try and make an honest dollar." He went over the road a second time and wasn't in the Federal prison a year before he was released through influence. Prison walls were never made to hold as cool a rascal as he was. "Have you a match?" It was an ideal night. Millions of stars flecked the sky overhead. No one seemed willing to sleep. We had heard the evening gun and the trumpets sounding over at the fort, but their warnings of the closing day were not for us. The guards changed, the cattle sleeping like babes in a trundle bed. Finally, one by one, the boys sought their blankets, while sleep and night wrapped these children of the plains in her arms.